It's becoming more common now that I should post something online to read, and people won't read it. They won't see the big picture. They won't examine the article. Say I post something that takes maybe 3 or 4 hours to read in its entirety. Nobody will take the time out to do that. Even if you could read it like 2 to 3 minutes a page, if I were to post a 29-page document, you would think that somebody would be like, well, 29 pages times 2 or 3 minutes. What is that, about an hour? Maybe an hour and 15 minutes to read, max? But instead of reading the article, they make assumptions based off of whatever it is they previously believed, and they don't want to see things for what they really are. They always just look for what it is that conforms to their belief, and then that becomes the truth. And if they don't find anything that conforms to what they believe, then they just disregard all of it. In this specific case, I'm sorry for the long introduction, somebody told me on Reddit that Alexander Oparin's Origin of Life paper had nothing to do with stellar metamorphosis. Are you kidding me? This theory is about 100 years old. It has everything to do with stellar metamorphosis. In fact, it explains the origin of life itself. Only Alexander Oparin didn't develop the theory of stellar metamorphosis. He was just sort of looking at things from a chemical aspect. You know, the same way Miller and Urey did, the same way Helmholtz did, the same way all the chemists and biology experts did back in like the 1920s, 1930s. But as we'll see here, the fusion experts got hold of this and they just completely ruined astronomy. Without further ado, I will read this word for word from the translation of Oparin's paper, Origin of Life. Page 5. I'll link this to the bottom so you guys can read along. This is on page 5. How then did life appear on the earth? There was a time when, according to the views now generally accepted among scientists, the earth was a white-hot ball. Astronomy, geology, mineralogy, and other exact sciences provide evidence for this, and it is beyond doubt. This means that conditions on the earth are such that it was unthinkable not to say impossible, for life to exist on it. Only after the earth had lost a considerable amount of heat by dissipating it into the cold of interplanetary space, and the cooling had gone so far that the water vapor had formed the first hot seas, did the existence of organisms like those we now see become possible. Page 15. In the course of the colossal length of time during which our planet, the Earth, has existed, the appropriate conditions must certainly have risen in which there could have been the conjunction of properties which were formerly disjoined to form the combination which is characteristic of living organisms. To discover these conditions would be to explain the origin of life. Essentially what it means is this next paragraph here. From uncombined elements to organic compounds. That's incredibly important because it lays down the foundation for understanding the Earth and its multitude of compounds and trillions of tons of organic matter and even crystalline structure in the form of rocks and minerals wasn't always combined together. Astronomers tell us that this is still page 15. Astronomers tell us that very, very long ago, millions, perhaps even thousands of millions of years ago, billions, the Earth existed in the form of an enormous cloud of incandescent gas. We cannot yet form any accurate idea of the extreme heat which prevailed in that cloud, which represented the Earth of the future. At the time, they considered it was hot enough to make iron boil, turning into vapor like water when it falls in a red-hot stove. But in essence, we do know now. We have an entire diagram, or an understanding that it was very hot, just like the sun is now. Of course, he says this. He says this in the document. I'm going to continue reading. Alexander Oparin, there he is. Born March 2nd, 1894. He died April 22nd, 1980. He essentially, there he is, handsome fellow. He essentially died before the age of exoplanets even came to being, And he had this fantastic idea they can never develop fully because the data wasn't there. As well, even if the data was there, the fusion experts claimed the sun is theirs as a nuclear furnace. So any type of like formation mechanism of the Earth just completely ignored things like the sun or Sirius or any other hot shining star. So basically we went on a large detour in essence. Page 15 still. Under these conditions, there could be no question of the occurrence of any chemical compounds. Even at lower temperatures, all the compounds we know break down into their simplest components, the elements. These elements exist as very small particles of matter, atoms, which were distributed freely and haphazardly in space, and constituted the earliest cloud from which the Earth was later to arise. This was the primeval chaos, in which it seemed everything was in disorderly, unrelated, and irrational movement, the surface of the sun. The Earth was like the sun. Look at the sun's irrational movement in the solar atmosphere and on the surface. You'll see that it's extremely disorderly. It's a dissipative structure. But I don't want to read page 15. I don't want to make this too long. I'll go ahead straight to page 17. This is the really good stuff. Scientists now believe that each of the stars which we see originated in the same way as we described for the Earth, from a gaseous cloud by gradual cooling and increasing density of the vapors of which it was formed. So we see there that he still kind of separates planet from star a tiny, tiny bit, but this is where it gets interesting. Depending on a number of factors, mainly on the size of the cloud, the process of solidification might occur quickly or slowly. The different heavenly bodies are now, therefore, at different stages of development. Some of these stars shine with a white or bluish light and are in the earliest stage of development. Others, which have developed further, are yellowish, and our sun is one of these. Finally, the stars which have cooled most and are already going out shine with a red light. A further stage of cooling is represented by the planets which can no longer shine with their own light. Our Earth is one of these. Thus, a study of the different heavenly bodies gives us an idea of the different stages of cooling of our own planet. This study has made great strides forward since Kirchhoff developed what is called the spectral method of analysis. Sun's one of those hot young stars, as you can see, and then it cools, becomes a red one, and then it becomes a brown dwarf. The first brown dwarf wasn't discovered until the 1980s, I believe, after Oparin had died. So he didn't even know about brown dwarfs, I guess. You know, it just sucks. He had the whole theory in his hands. If only he had lived another, 1980, he had 38, he died, he'd be like 118, 104, 6, 124 years old. Be an old dude. One day we'll get to that level anyways. Yeah. But what Kirchhoff did here is Kirchhoff was a part of a lot of the astronomers who took the spectral analysis of stars and combined that with all the fusion experts, and they combined together and they drew up these stellar evolution models based off the fusion model, but really all we really had was the spectral analysis method of stars. So we classify stars based off their shining ability. So if they didn't shine, if they were a dark planet, as Oparin says here, then no spectral analysis was basically available yet. Now we're going back to that because now what's happening is that we have a large star and we have a very small evolved star orbiting in front of it. So what we can do is measure the atmosphere of the smaller star, the very, very old star that's orbiting around it, by first measuring the big one, and then the small one will go around it, so we'll measure the differences to see what elements are in there, or we can see the light passing from the big one through the small one all the way to our telescope. So that's some really advanced stuff there. But Yeah, we weren't at that level back in the 1920s quite yet. Our technology wasn't up to speed. Page 18. There was a time when the Earth, too, was passing through the same stage of development as the Sun, namely that of being a yellow star. I can't make this stuff up, man. It says it right fucking there. Look at that. I don't know if you guys can see it. Again, I'll link this to the bottom. Later, as it gradually radiated its heat outwards into the cold interplanetary space, it became cooler and cooler. It turned from a yellow star into a red one, its light becoming dimmer and dimmer, and finally went out together. The Earth became a dark planet. You know, if people would just pay attention, they would have the entire Earth in their hands. They would have all of astronomy in their back pocket. If they would just shut the fuck up in their brains and pay the fuck attention, they would get all of it instantly. Right in front of them, man. It's like the most frustrating thing in the world. And this has been around for 100 years. I don't know. Says, I'm sorry for getting upset. I'm just angry about all of this. Page 21. Here's something really interesting. Ammonia could also have been formed primarily at a far earlier stage in the existence of the Earth by the condensation of hydrogen and nitrogen in the upper layers of the atmosphere. Basically, the hydrogen and nitrogen combine together to make ammonia. No shit. That's what's inside of gas giants. And the ammonia rains down, eventually dissipates because the gravitation isn't strong enough. Now, I outline that in the basic principle of stellar evolution. It's the principle of chemical complexity. The elements are separated and they're ionized, and eventually as the star shrinks and cools, they combine together, making the beginnings of what we call life, rocks and minerals, and every single elemental combination and molecule in existence. Right, sorry for cussing you guys. But there he is. There's the guy that started it all off. There you go.